Smuggler has been jailed for attempting to hide 7 migrants in the overhead compartment of a motorhome and then trying to get them into the UK. The group were discovered by Border Force officials at Harwich International in Essex last December. 2 of the migrants claimed asylum, but 5 were deemed illegal and sent back to the Netherlands. Minister for Illegal Migration Michael Tomlinson said that those putting lives at risk would face the full weight of the law. A Just Stop Oil activist disrupted 4,000 plane passengers, with the court also hearing she scaled railings above the M25 near Heathrow in protest against 40-degree heat. Cressida Gethin said she wanted to interrupt business as usual and draw attention to what she called dire temperatures in the UK. Her actions led to delays on multiple flights, according to British Airways. The 22-year-old Cambridge student has since defended her climate activism, arguing the severity of the 2022 heatwave justified her actions. Her trial for causing a public nuisance continues. And a judge is facing criticism after liking a pro-Palestine social media post. Judge Tan Ikram spared jail for 3 women who displayed images of paragliders at a protest just a week after Hamas used paragliders to enter and attack Israel in October. He was found to have liked a post which said "Free Palestine" and that branded Israel a terrorist. The Crown Prosecution Service says it's carefully considering any future actions in relation to the case. In the United States, Donald Trump will become the first ever former president to stand trial on criminal charges next month. A New York judge denied his request today to throw out a so-called hush money case, setting a trial date for the 25th of March. The case alleges he falsified business records related to a payment made to an adult film star before the 2016 US election. Mr. Trump says he hasn't committed a crime. And here in the UK, voters are casting their ballots in the final hours of 2 by-elections taking place in Wellingborough, in Northamptonshire, and Kingswood in South Gloucestershire. The Kingswood vote was triggered after Conservative Chris Skidmore quit in protest over the government's green policy. In Wellingborough, polls are open after Peter Bone was accused of bullying and sexual misconduct, although he denied those allegations. Voting closes at 10 o'clock tonight, and right here on GB News we'll be broadcasting throughout the night with expert analysis and those all-important results, all from midnight tonight right through to breakfast. For the very latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
So, the news this morning was not very good for the Prime Minister, in fact, somewhat embarrassing. We are now back in recession. They're calling it a technical recession. We'll have a look at what that really means in just a moment. But remember the People's Forum with Rishi Sunak that we hosted here on GB News on Monday evening. It all hinged around the 5 pledges. And remember that old phrase, it's the economy stupid. Halving inflation to ease the cost of living was the first. Growing the economy was the second. Ensuring national debt was the third. Cutting NHS waiting lists and passing laws to stop the boats. So 3 of the 5 pledges are around the economy. And kind of that makes sense, because when you think about it, probably the key determinant in how we vote is, do we feel better off or worse off since the government got elected? I have to say, for once on these growth figures, I point the finger of blame, personally, far more at the Bank of England than I do at the government. I think we have the worst governor of the Bank of England in our history. They were far too slow to put interest rates up when inflation was clearly coming down the track, and many of us were screaming about this. No, inflation's not going to happen. Then when it started, don't worry your poor little heads, it's just transitory. And now we're going the other way. They are far too slow to reduce interest rates. And I think that interest rate message actually is, for me, a very important driver of why we are now in recession. But my debate tonight is Britain getting poorer? And I apply that both at a personal level and indeed at a national level, because I think we really are. And I think one of the problems is that so much of this economic debate is couched in terms that most folks just don't understand. And that's no insult to you, the viewers, the listeners, or anybody else. It's just put in such a way that it's not obvious to anybody what it means. Well, our job here is to try and simplify everything. Give me your thoughts. Is Britain getting poorer? Farage@gbnews.com or tweet #Farage on GB News. Well, who better to speak to at this juncture than our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, when we're told it's a technical recession, what on earth does that mean?
Strap yourself in, Nigel. There's some econo-speak coming, but I'll gild it with some sugar coating so we can all understand it. Look, economists, they do speak in riddles.
Yeah.
They're the kind of experts that don't know what they're talking about, and they like you to make you feel as if that's your fault. It's just what we do. Now, a recession, the technical definition of a recession is 2 successive quarters when GDP, the sum total of goods and services in the economy, contracts. And we learnt from the Office for National Statistics this morning that is actually what happened in the last 2 quarters of last year. So it was confirmed that July, August, September, the 3rd quarter of last year, compared to the same period in 2022, the economy contracted just by 0.1%. GDP fell. But then in the final quarter, October, November, December, compared to the same period in 2022, the economy fell by 0.3%. There's your 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. That's a technical recession. No wonder Rachel Reeves hastily convened a press conference, fair play to her. She's Shadow Chancellor, saying that the Tory economic strategy had failed. Though I agree with you, the Bank of England was woefully late to recognise inflation. And now you've got some members of the Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economists, even now, they are arguing for rate rises rather than rate cuts, even though inflation's come down all the way from 11% 16 months ago all the way down to 4%.
But isn't that part of it, Liam? I mean, one of the reasons inflation is coming down is because our economy, our post-COVID economy, is stagnating.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. We have seen falls in energy prices. We have seen easing of post-COVID supply chain issues and so on. But a lot of it is that the Bank of England, with 14 successive interest rises, has just squeezed the life out of the economy. You've got credit contracting, you've got companies getting rid of their loans, disinvesting, you've got the housing market slowing right down, you've got consumers not wanting to borrow in order to buy big items like cars and white goods and so on, and that slows the economy down. But in your introduction, what I thought was interesting, you were talking about, are we getting richer or are we getting poorer? Now, the headline numbers on wages, we've got real wage growth, because wage growth is 6.2% on average and inflation's 4%, so your real take-home pay after inflation is going up.
That message has been going out a lot.
That message has been going out a lot. But guess what? Loads of people are paying much more tax than they were. These stealth taxes, the freezing of thresholds, people on very modest incomes getting dragged into higher tax brackets, paying tax at 40% when they're not really wealthy at all.
Nurses, police officers.
At all. Mid-ranking teachers, they shouldn't be paying tax at 40%. Of course they shouldn't. They should be paying the basic rate of income tax. And then I've been drilling down into these ONS numbers that came out this morning. And while the GDP numbers contracted, as I said, 0.1% and 0.3% in respective quarters at the back end of last year, GDP per head, which is actually a less imperfect measure of living standards.
Which means your own personal situation.
Yeah, it means the size of the economy divided by the number of people in the economy. We've obviously had huge population growth, and, whatever your views on politics, that's just a fact, right? It's a fact that in 2022, the net immigration in this country was the size in a single year of the city of Leeds, which is our 6th biggest city, right, by most definitions. Unbelievable. I won't dare to call it the capital of Yorkshire because people from Sheffield will hate me even more. But joking aside, when your population goes up so sharply and GDP is stagnating, GDP per head is going to fall. And rather than falling in the last 2 quarters by 0.1% and 0.3%, GDP per head fell in the last 2 quarters of 2023, respectively, by 0.4% and 0.6%.
Wow.
In fact, we haven't seen GDP per head increase in any quarter since the middle of 2022.
Thank you. So in simple terms, people are getting poorer.
Absolutely.
Rishi keeps telling us the debt's being cut. In fact, ever since 2010, I've been told the debt's being cut. Yet when I look at the numbers, the debt keeps going up. Are we poorer nationally?
That's difficult to say. Look, there's been no... you would be the first to say, and you'd be right, there's been no kind of Brexit-induced meltdown or disaster, which we were told would happen by the Treasury in 2016 before the referendum. Yeah. The UK's basically been middle of the pack across the G7, across the OECD advanced economies in terms of growth since both 2016 and since 2020 when the withdrawal agreement came into effect. But the whole Western world has really been stagnating. You know, Germany's been in recession. Europe's biggest economy since, for most of 2023, Germany was in recession.
The fact our GDP is doing better than France and Germany's is cold comfort farm, given where we are.
Because all Western economies are stagnating. All Western economies are going through a crisis of productivity, particularly in Europe. The standout economy probably in the world, even compared to the Chinese economy at the moment, is the US economy, which is seeing growth of 2 to 3%. And that's because, or it's partly not just the sort of drive and dynamism and huge capital markets of the US, it's also because their electricity prices are a third of what they are here, because they've had an energy revolution that we haven't had.
Liam, as ever, thank you very, very much. I'm joined now down the line by Helen Barnard, Director of Policy at the Trussell Trust. Now, Helen, I know you're very much on the front line of people getting poorer, of people slipping into poverty, and I understand that the Trussell Trust organises about 1,200 food banks around the United Kingdom. To what extent are you seeing an increase in people simply getting poorer?
I mean, we are seeing really bleak pictures out there in our communities. So if you take just the first 6 months of this year, we had to provide 1.5 million emergency food parcels. That's a record that's more than ever before. And what we're finding is more and more people whose incomes are just so low they can't afford the essentials. And particularly we're seeing disabled people, carers and families with children who are finding themselves with no option but to turn to a food bank just to try and make ends meet.
Now, Helen, a cynic would say that people that go to food banks still pay for their Sky Sports subscriptions and other things, and maybe they need to reprioritise. And there's been a lot of that talk, that people go to food banks because they're not prioritising food over other things in life.
I mean, what we see out there is that people come to food banks because their incomes are incredibly low and they can't cover even the essentials. And it doesn't matter how well they budget, because believe me, they are the best budgeters out there because they have to be, but their income just won't stretch. So what we find is people put off going to the food bank as long as they possibly can. By the time they reach us, often they're already been going without meals, they're behind with bills, they're in debt, they are desperately trying to hold things together, and they just can't make the money stretch because it's not enough. When you calculate how much somebody gets on universal credit, for instance, and you compare it to a basket of essentials, it's way below. And people are just stuck in this situation week after week.
When someone goes to a food bank, is it likely to be for a period of a month, 3 months, while they're having a tough time? Do they then not come to the food bank? Or is it one of those situations where you start going to a food bank and you keep going to a food bank?
It's a real mix. So people are referred to our food banks. So people will see maybe a GP or a health visitor, or they will call Citizens Advice for some money advice. And out of that conversation, it will emerge that they haven't got enough money for food and other essentials, so they'll be referred. What we would always do is talk to them about what are the issues that have brought them there, try and connect them to the right advice and support that will help them get out of that. But what we find more and more these days is that will help. But because the basic rate of benefits is so low, particularly, even when you do all of that, people are still stuck. And I can give you an example of somebody. Steve is a man that we've been supporting. He was a security guard. He got injured in a scuffle at work, got a bad back injury, was left not able to stand for very long. It took about a year for him to get assessed, get the support he should. And in the meantime, what we found was the basic rate of benefits wouldn't cover the bare essentials. So that's why he ended up coming to the food bank for support.
Understood. Helen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, I'm joined by Scarlett Maguire, former Labour Communications Advisor. Scarlett, you've heard what Liam had to say, pure economic analysis, that GDP per capita, per head, per person, is falling more. People are getting poorer. You've heard from Helen, really at the sharp end of this, with 1,200 food banks. So here's the question. We've got a Prime Minister who made these big 5 pledges to the country. 3 of the 5 were economic. Two are not working really very well at all. One is, but maybe as a result of the others not.
Well, I mean, we do have to say about inflation is that when it was high, it wasn't his fault. And now that it's coming down, it's all due to him.
Yeah, I
mean, you know.
No, I completely get it. And actually, I personally think that inflation will fall to 2% because of a stagnation of the British economy.
Well, precisely, not because of anything
So,
wonderful.
it's hardly a big victory, but, you know, if we have a stagnating economy, and yes, we're doing better than France and Germany, but that's not the point. My question to you is, what can Labour do to actually make us better off?
OK, so what we all understand is that when the general election comes, if Labour wins it, that they are going to be walking into an economic nightmare, right? That actually things are not good, that the public services are not being, and so they have to walk. So the first thing they have to do is they have to stabilise the economy, because one of the great complaints from business is you're not taking us seriously. You know, businesses actually are not in favour of unfunded tax cuts because they say, you know, where is the money going to come from? All of this, everything, if you look at it, everything is being said, oh, we're going to do this in 2025. Everything is being put off, and business finds that very difficult. So one of the things is that business have to know, everybody has to know, business and the public sector have to know where we are. So we all know about Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules. Every member of the shadow cabinet know. Yet you are
But she's kind of said that she wants the OBR to tell her what to do.
No, she hasn't. She said is you do not spend money and you go through me, and we only borrow to invest. It's really, really important. And we do not do unfunded tax cuts. So that's the first thing, is to stabilise it, to say this is how we're going to go on. And then what we have to get is investment, because that's what's been lacking. I mean, I was listening to somebody from the Resolution Foundation who said exactly the same as Liam about that GDP, because there's an argument about it. And you're right, it's just an economist thing. But actually, that what matters is GDP per person.
Absolutely.
Right? But he also said that you can't have growth without investment. We're not investing. And so again, you have to look to the private sector, and you have to say to the private sector, we're safe. We're going to do what we say we're going to do.
And tax. What are they? I mean, you know, in '97, one of the reasons Blair got elected with a big majority was promising he would not put up taxes. And yet they hit private pensions. I mean, governments do all sorts of things. Is this Labour assurance on tax, is it real?
Yeah. I mean, the worrying thing is where is the money going to come from? Because, I mean, I know you aren't great on public services, but actually... That's
not fair or true. I want good public services.
You want good public services, but you have to pay for them.
At the right price.
You have to pay for them. And there is a real problem. And you talk to members of the shadow cabinet, and you've got schools... which are, you know, we know that many of them have to be rebuilt. You've got hospitals that, I mean, one of the things that Labour is saying is we have to sort out hospital waiting lists because we've got to get people back to work.
Well, the last time Labour were in government, they put in place PFI deals, which have burdened hospitals with it. It was 25 years ago.
No,
I'll grant you.
Absolutely agree.
But here's the problem, Scott.
Well, some of us always knew that PFI was going to be a problem.
Yeah, well, well, the Prime Minister didn't, Mr. Blair.
The Prime Minister didn't.
But here's the problem with everything you've just said.
Yes.
It's almost, and that's the Labour position, and I understand it, the viewers understand it, it's almost no different to the Conservatives at all.
Yeah, but the Conservatives aren't doing it.
No, but it's almost no different.
Well, no, but it is different because...
If you're telling me, as a 2019 Conservative voter, that I should vote Labour, I can't see how the offering's any different.
Because the difference is that, so in 2019, they voted and nothing happened. I mean, so people up north voted for levelling up. Yep. Nothing has been levelled up. In fact, what we find out is the one thing that might have made a difference, which was HS2 up there. I mean, I was never keen on HS2, but the billions that was going to go into it, no, it's been scrapped. And they say, oh, this'll help transport in the north. And then you find out that a lot of the things are in the south. So actually, the point is that it's not that the 2019 offering was so awful. It never, ever happened.
Fair enough. Well, never let it be said that we don't let political parties have their say on this channel. We do, and Scarlett clearly believes it passionately. For me, the extraordinary thing... No, of course we will see.
Time I'll come back
but the
and show you.
extraordinary thing is just how narrow the differences between the two parties are. That's my view. In a moment, big front page on the Daily Mail, a huge rise in anti-Semitic attacks. And I'm going to show you something on TikTok about a woman dying of cancer, trying to raise money for her kid. But because she likes Israel, she's now been cancelled. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it is a genuine, real worry.
...2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, some of your reactions to that debate that I sparked around is Britain getting poorer? Maureen says, I think the whole country is definitely poorer. Why? I don't know. But with all the shops closing down in high streets and shopping centres, many town and city centres look like ghost towns. Well, Maureen, that's true. There is an argument, though, the economy has shifted to online. One viewer, anonymous, says, the cost of surviving, not living, is out of control. Food and fuel, then council's tax. Cost of stamps, yes, goodness gracious me, aren't they expensive, is higher than it's ever been. Only a car is now a luxury, not a necessity. Road tax rising, car insurance doubling over the last 2 years. Do you know, you're absolutely right. Things like car insurance have just gone through the roof. And I don't think, actually, that getting national inflation figures reflects that in any way at all. Now, we've been debating very often on this channel the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of deep intolerance. This story is truly incredible. The woman's name is Kat Janice. She's 31 years old. She lives in Virginia. She has terminal cancer. She doesn't have that long to live, and I can show you some pictures of her in hospital. Now, she is a singer by trade, and she's put out a song on the internet, Dance You Outta My Head. Let's have a listen. So her song, as you can see there, was shared by lots and lots of people, and for good reason, because she has a 7-year-old boy. She's going to die very shortly, and she's used that song, and it's been pushed and sponsored by a lot of very well-known people, a lot of ordinary folk too, in an effort to raise money for that 7-year-old boy when she's gone. All right, and that's why it's taken off. And millions of people have seen these clips. But somebody has discovered that she has liked pro-Israeli posts, that she has been supportive in the wake of the October the 7th attacks of some of the work the IDF are doing. And now the backlash has begun. The basic argument is that while she wants you to help her 7-year-old, she couldn't care less about 7-year-olds in Gaza that have died. The level of hatred and vitriol that has been poured against this woman effectively has cancelled her. And that, folks, is where we are. I find it deeply, deeply depressing and upsetting. Now, the Daily Mail front page today, a report with the Community Security Trust showing a huge increase in really not just unpleasant, but actually in many cases quite violent attacks against Jews in Britain. I'm joined by Jonathan Sacerdoti, Jewish journalist and broadcaster. And Jonathan, the numbers are what they are. The Jewish population in Britain is so much smaller than most people think. How many? Oh, millions. No, there are not. It's about 300,000 people who identify as Jewish.
Even less, 271,000.
OK, well, I was roughly right. But it's a very small number that identify as Jewish, let alone practice. And yet we have a Muslim population of several million, growing by 75% every decade. And that's at the core of this, isn't it?
Jews are about 0.5% of the UK population, and despite that, a lot of people spend a lot of time obsessing on us and our supposed powers and controls over different things. I think one of the problems when we look at rising anti-Semitism in general is that most people have never met a Jew. And so if you haven't met Jewish people, you might be inclined to believe or subscribe to some of the more outlandish conspiracy theories and things like that about them.
You might, but isn't the problem here coming from Islamism?
Well, certainly some of it is. I would say that there is... Yep, I would say some. There are, I think... Anti-Semitism predates Islamism. I think anti-Semitism is called the oldest hatred for good reason. I mean, there's been Christian anti-Semitism in the past. There is today far-left anti-Semitism, far-right anti-Semitism, and Islamist anti-Semitism, no doubt about it. At times like this, when I think there is a spike in anti-Semitic incidents, partly inspired by, let's say, or at the same time as what's going on in Israel, military action in Israel, I think that the Islamist anti-Semitism absolutely does perhaps take a front seat, but we can't be complacent and say that that's the only reason.
You're right, and you're absolutely right. Stephen Fry said that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper, and it was a very interesting way of describing it. You know, I've seen what's happened with my own eyes to the Jewish community in Brussels, because I was there for 20 years. I've seen the Jewish quarter in Strasbourg, with kids going into school with armed soldiers with them to protect them. And basically, if you're Jewish, you don't live in Brussels anymore, unless you're wealthy and you live in a sort of gated community. Is there a danger that's happening to London?
Look, even here in London and elsewhere in the UK, Jewish schools, synagogues, community centres have had high security around them for years. It's not just now. I think it's something that, as Jews, we're quite used to it. We almost don't notice it sometimes. When you go into a synagogue, there's usually security guards, there's lots of cameras. Sometimes you'll even have airport-style X-ray machines for certain places if there's a high-profile event or guest. I think that is terrible, but it's like that in many parts of the world. It's like that for good reason, because we just want to be careful. There are plenty of people who want to kill Jews.
Do you fear for the future of Jews in this country?
I think I'd be lying if I said I didn't. And speaking to more and more Jewish people all the time, I've encountered, I think, much more anxiety over the last 4 months than perhaps ever in my life. And I'm quite tuned into this subject. My late father was a hidden child during the Holocaust in Italy. And I've grown up always very aware of the idea of keeping an eye out for anti-Semitism. As you say, it's a light sleeper. And I had, from as long as I can remember, his lessons. So when I do see things happening in the UK, it does worry me because, as I keep saying to people, I'm British. I'm born here. I'm very proud of being a Brit. I have every right to practice my religion, also to have come from a different background ethnically or a different religion than other people. We all do. And I think it's shocking when Jewish people are seen as somehow different or other from the rest of Britain in ways that just are not true and not helpful. And the one thing that I do hope that viewers think about when they see the headlines like today's is I think that this isn't really just a problem for Jewish people, because a society that has this level of anti-Semitism that goes unchecked sometimes by police, we have the police not really policing the protests sufficiently. We have even the court case of those 3 women who were supporting Hamas.
We've covered it this week extensively.
Found guilty, and yet the judge who had liked anti-Israel posts online decided not to punish them, in his own words, even though he found them guilty. Those sorts of things, I think it's for all of us in Britain to speak up against, because it's not just for Jews. There's something wrong with our society. Our moral compass is awry when we don't speak out against that kind of prejudice and discrimination against anybody.
We've seen it before, this level of intolerance. The Jews come first, others come afterwards. Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for joining me. In a moment, we'll talk about the government's smoke-free campaign and the huge amounts of your money they're spending on advertising, whilst not mentioning the huge growth in the use of illegal and damaging drugs. Have they got their priorities ever so slightly wrong?
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public will now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The government is pushing full steam ahead with one of Rishi Sunak's main priorities, that is to bring in legislation that will mean anybody born from 2009 or afterwards will not be able to buy cigarettes, but those born in 2008 will. I can't think of any piece of legislation more badly designed or more guaranteed to create an illegal black market than that. And the campaign is for us to be smoke-free by 2030. They're spending loads of money on it, big wraparounds of national newspapers coming our way in the next few days. And yet, while smoking may be a problem, no mention of the damage illegal drugs are doing to youngsters. I think they've got their priorities wrong. Joining me is Dr. Lawrence Buckman, former GP and committee chair of the British Medical Association. Lawrence, I will take it as read that you'd love no one to smoke at all. I get that. But do you see my point about this being crackpot legislation?
I'm always nervous when I find people legislating for things to make society change when you're going to produce cliff edges. And what you've just described is a cliff edge.
Yeah.
You've said people born in this year will be able to buy cigarettes and people born in that year will not be able to buy cigarettes. That's immediately perverse. The idea that you could actually stop people smoking, of course, you wouldn't expect me to say anything other than I believe in it. But how you stop people, first, I'm never keen on banning things. I think banning things, it induces odd behaviour in order to get round the ban, whereas actually making it difficult, that's a different thing. And different countries have tried different techniques. New Zealand, of course, have tried this cliff edge approach, and it seems to be working, although, of course, there'll be a black market. So it's an idea. I'm not a great enthusiast for it, but I can see why it's there.
Yeah, no, well, that's very sensible, Lawrence. It really is. But here's the point I'm making. Smoking may cause long-term damage to the individual, but very little short-term damage to the individual. The use of illegal drugs, and some of the stuff that's coming over from America now is terrifying, causes huge short-term damage, psychological damage, physical damage. Wouldn't the government be better to try and educate people more about some of these drugs rather than worrying about long-term effects from smoking, given actually that most youngsters don't smoke anyway anymore?
Well, I think the number of people who smoke is still quite alarming. I agree it's falling over the last few decades. It has fallen. More important, though, is how you tackle illegal drugs and whether the government doing something about that could make a difference to it, because I'm not persuaded that they could. And the reason is that there's mountains of legislation to say you shouldn't be using illegal drugs. Yeah. And also, everybody knows the harm it does. Yet people do it. And people do it for all sorts of reasons. And I think adverts really almost never reach the people who need to be reached. We have to make it harder for people to bring drugs into the country. We don't appear to be doing terribly well on that. We need to make it easier to get people into rehab rather than sticking them in prison. You may have committed a criminal offence, in which case you need to be in prison. But if you haven't committed a criminal offence, really what you need is help. And there's not a lot of help around. And so I think legislating this as a way of getting out of drug addiction, I'm not sure it's going to work. And
no.
I think we need a health service that's geared to looking after these people rather than locking them up, punishing them. Locking up and punishing sounds great, and it's always very politically.
I know.
Sure, it works.
No, well, a lot of common sense there, in my opinion, from Lawrence Buckman. Thank you very much indeed for joining me tonight on the programme. Tomorrow is a big day for National Westminster Banking Group. We will get their annual figures. We will have confirmation of the appointment of a new chief executive officer. Remember, Alison Rose was the boss until she decided to have a chat about my personal situation with the BBC's business and economics correspondent. She's gone. We get the new CEO tomorrow. We're told it's going to be Paul Thwaite. He has been the interim CEO, and he's been at the bank for some considerable period of time. But perhaps even more importantly, the bank, along with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, are getting ready to sell the remaining 35% of NatWest shares the government owns. Now, overall, it's not a very good deal for the taxpayer because we bailed them out at 502 pence a share. They're currently trading at about £2.20 a share. They want it to be the modern equivalent of Telcid, the British gas sale to millions of ordinary folk back in the late 1980s. But I would say this: if the new people put in position are simply a continuum of those that went before, and if the £350 million of bonuses are being given out to the very people who said vile things about me, and if there's been no recognition that the Travis Smith report into the whole affair was simply a whitewash, then how on earth can we trust this bank to sell shares to the British public when there's been absolutely no change of culture within that bank whatsoever? If NatWest think it's going to be plain sailing from tomorrow to a public issue in June, well, you know what? They might just have me to deal with again. He's a voice known over the years to tens of millions. He's been around in sports journalism for half a century. He's crossed your life in some way, all of you at some point. On Talking Pints tonight, I've got with me in just a moment Jim Rosenthal.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, I have a major exclusive on child grooming gangs and their bid to fight deportation from the UK. Plus, is the government using mass migration to hide how poor our country has become? And we'll bring you the latest on the British judge who liked an anti-Israel post before letting 3 terrorist sympathisers walk free. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting.
Yeah.
And that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Whether you like sport or not, you will not have been able during your life to avoid this bloke because he's done 8 FIFA World Cups, 3 Rugby World Cups, 2 Olympics, 150 Formula One races, and some of the biggest boxing bouts we ever saw going back a couple of years. Delighted to have as my guest on Talking Pints someone that I've grown up with, Jim Rosenthal.
Well,
Jim.
cheers. Well, cheers. Thank you very much. That's my lifetime dismissed in about 9 seconds, isn't it?
I don't think they're bad achievements. I mean, kind of, getting into sports journalism, being around for basically half a century.
Yes,
and, I'm a sports nut. I love sports, all sports. I'm fascinated by them. Whether it's suddenly a 16-year-old Luke Littler, or whether it's me being up at ridiculous o'clock this morning.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
The cricket,
getting up at...
Good. But even if you don't like sport, you can't really avoid it. It's such a huge part.
I think I've been very fortunate in that I've always loved sport. And I found something that I could translate my love of it into putting shoes on the boys' feet, to put it that way.
How does Oxford lad, Jim Rosenthal, how does he happen into radio, television, sport? How does it happen?
Well, I mean, I did what I would say was a great apprenticeship, and I started right at the bottom. Local paper for 4 years, doing my shorthand and doing the court reporting and doing
real journalism.
All that. Well, real journalism probably. Yeah. And then I did 4 years there, and I went to local radio in Birmingham, Radio Birmingham, and did another 4 years there. And after a couple of years of that, I sort of realised. In fact, the station master said to me, "You're really good at news, but you're outstanding at sport." And I said, "You're telling me to," and that's what I did.
That's what you wanted to hear as well.
That's what I wanted to hear. I did want to hear that, yeah. And then down to the radio sports unit. It was a Radio 2 Sport. Then now it was Radio 5.
Yeah,
5
Live.
4 years there, and then ITV came calling in about 1980. And I think I stayed with them longer than poor old Nelson Mandela was in jail, to be quite honest. Did about 32 years with them, and so it's a good old stretch.
No,
really.
you had an amazing...
good stretch.
But it was in those days, I guess I'm showing my age, but you could turn on the telly, and you kind of knew that on One or ITV we'd see Dickie Davis or whoever it was, and then Channel 4 comes along and does horse racing, did it rather well, I thought, in the early days. I really rather enjoyed it. And it was all free. Well, you had to pay a BBC licence fee, but it was essentially... Now, I've got Sky Sports, but of course I can't watch the Test match on Sky Sports. No. I have to pay for another subscription. I want to watch a big boxing bout. It's going to cost 18 quid or whatever it is. I want to watch the darts final. It's going to cost a tenner or whatever it is. And we're suddenly seeing, if you want to watch live sport, you now need multiple subscriptions to do it. It's not very fair on those without much money,
is it? No, it isn't. But it is market forces, and it's the way things have gone. And I say, if you are a sports lover, you won't be very well served by terrestrial television.
It's gone, isn't it?
It's gone. It pretty much, to all intents and purposes, has been priced out of live sports coverage. And it's quite... I operated in an era when it was still alive and kicking, very much so. And listen, the BBC say we can't afford it. The BBC have got a tap that never stops, never gets turned off, to the tune of £5 billion a year. Don't say you can't afford it. Say you're going to put it elsewhere.
Yeah. But I wonder, you see, because I think, football benefits from terrestrial TV. I think the other sports suffer a little bit.
They do. I mean, boxing is a sport that I did a huge amount of on terrestrial television. People either like boxing or they don't. If you say, who knows? Someone else might go, I hate it, and I go, fine. I'm not going to try and convince you. But and there were, I mean, the numbers that turned on, for our on a Saturday night, Ben and you, I mean, we stopped the country. People came out of dinner parties to watch it, but then. A couple of things happened. Nigel Benn had a fight against a guy called McClellan, and he was put in hospital and damaged for life. And TV executives said, we don't really want that on peak time television. And I could sympathise with that. And then, of course, the money went up. And, I mean, just look at the money that everyone's earning from Saudi. And you go, we cannot compete with this. Where I think they got it wrong is that they should have done deals early with the satellite broadcaster, as opposed to saying we'll blow them out the sky.
But it's not going back, is it?
No.
It is what it is. Jim, you've done, this fascinates me because, you know, I've been a huge Test Match Special fan.
Right.
On the radio. Yeah. In fact, me appearing on View from the Boundary, one of the highlights of my career.
TMS,
Jonathan
well
Agnew
done.
interviewing me, you know, forget winning European elections. I mean, this was the big one. Jacob will sympathise with this. Because he's a cricket nut as well.
You're just a little boy at heart, aren't you?
Well, I hope we all are, in a way.
I think that's probably right, yeah.
You've done so much telly, so much radio. Which is your favourite to do?
Well, I mean, radio, I've always been very lucky with my voice. I haven't had a second's voice training in my life, and I've been very, very fortunate with that. Yeah. And I think radio made me comfortable in front of a microphone. Your face, what can you do? Yeah, and and
bit of makeup.
Well, what can you do? If people like your face, they like it. If they don't like it, they don't.
Yeah.
And dear old Dickie Davis, who was really good to me when I first went to ITV, and I was doing a heck of a lot, and he said, Jim, the face hasn't been invented that people want to look at all the time, which was a great bit of advice. Great bit of advice. And are you ever totally comfortable in front of a camera? Well, probably not. Probably not, because, you know, but you have to be yourself. That's the biggest thing. I think if you try and be someone else in front of a camera, the camera finds you out.
Radio is very personal, isn't it?
Very, very good. And
that relationship with the listeners is extraordinary.
Yes,
television is the same, but
it is.
Radio is very special.
It's easier as well. It's easier.
Yeah. You can turn up looking a bit rotten.
Absolutely.
Now, live commentary. You know, I mean, I do this live, 4 nights a week, and I make the odd mistake. I can't pretend I don't, but I do.
Everyone does, yeah.
Your worst moment?
My worst moment, I haven't actually dropped that many major ones. I haven't, I mean, someone out there might go, I can remember you when you said so. I've had a rule that whenever I've got one of these on, I am pretty boring, to be quite honest. So I've never been done.
Play it straight.
I've never been done swearing or whatever, and so I've probably been fortunate in that. I mean, another thing, I've broken a rule here tonight because all through my career, I've never ever have a sip of alcohol before I broadcast.
I'm Nigel Farage.
I know you are. So this is the first for me to get a bit of red wine down me tonight. Good on you. Well done.
And when you look,
I'm still making vague sense, aren't I? Really?
No, you do very well, Jim. When you look at all the sports, and you love a lot of sports.
Yes.
Your favourite?
I think football's always been my backbone for me. Listen, I was lucky enough to present the Rugby World Cup when we won it.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Last minute, Johnny Wilkinson.
Unbelievable night. And again, whether I did it good, bad or indifferent, I finished that programme and I thought, well, no one can take that away from me. It's a bit like Johnny Wilkinson. No one can take it away from me. And no one can take it away from that. I was up front for one of the greatest sporting triumphs that England have ever had across the board.
Yeah.
But I can honestly look you in the eye and say that I've never been bored by anything I've done. I've never actually, and I have shoveled some right old crap in my time, if I'm honest with you. But I've always done it, and I've always given it due deference.
You've always looked like you loved it.
I do love it. There is something about the live broadcasting thing as well.
It's real.
Even here with you in this dungeon. Even here with you.
I'll take that as a compliment. I'll take that. I'll take the talking points, and I'll treat that as a compliment. Jacob, these great sporting figures.
It's wonderful. I mean, Henry Blofeld seems to me to be the greatest living Englishman at the moment, with that brilliant way of creating a word picture that in that mellifluous voice that it's
That's
just
what you can do on
such a joy
radio.
to listen to.
Yeah.
And I actually met Jonathan Agnew. I was very pleased to do it, and he reminded me I'd called for him to have a pay rise in the House of Commons. Somebody had been going on about some football commentator, and I said, actually, the BBC is wasting its licence fee. It should go to Jonathan Agnew.
You see, there's Jacob, sometimes wanting to change market forces. Now, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm back with you on Monday. I'll be in America next week. A lot going on out there. Let's have a look at the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Friday's going to be a much drier and brighter day for many of us, but we have still got some heavy rain to come through the rest of the evening. That's as a result of this weather front that's slowly pushing eastwards across the country through the rest of the day and through tonight. So there's still some heavy rain to come across parts of the southwest. That'll push into the Midlands later on this evening and then into the southeast, but rain should be fairly limited by the time it arrives into the southeast. Behind it, it should turn much clearer as well. So some clear spells to come tonight, but still got very mild air. So it will be another very mild night tonight, frost-free across the country by tomorrow morning. There'll also be some early sunshine, particularly across eastern areas of Scotland, as well as central areas of England too tomorrow morning. And we'll see a good deal of sunshine through the day. Some thicker cloud across parts of northwestern England, North Wales, that could be thick enough to bring some drizzly rain. But in any of the sunshine, it'll feel fairly pleasant. Highs of 13 or 14 degrees in the south or 12 degrees further north. A bright start to Saturday across eastern areas, but cloud will thicken through the day as this weather front approaches. So some drizzly rain in the west through the morning, and then a heavy spell of rain to come through the evening across western areas and perhaps on Sunday morning in the east. But once that clears on Sunday, it should be a fairly dry and bright day for many of us, and it will be staying mild all through the weekend. See you later.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Hello, good evening, it's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The United Kingdom has officially entered recession as the latest figures have revealed the economy contracted for the last 2 consecutive quarters of 2023. But what can we expect when the chief ostrich of the Bank of England refuses to move his head from the sand? As Sadiq Khan wastes